I am 72 years old, and if anyone had told me even a decade ago that I would be starting my life over at this age, I would have laughed in their face. But here I am, at the threshold of something new, a little shaky, a little stubborn, but ready. Most shopkeepers spend their lives watching items move from shelf to counter, from counter to someone's home. But only now, in these final chapters of my story, have I stopped long enough to look back and see the whole journey of my own life. And what I see is strange and heavy, because most of it, the better part of it, already sits behind me like a long road I can't walk again. My name is Obadiah Pennywell, though folks here in Orland Park just call me Obi. For 32 years, I was known as the man behind Pennywell & Sons hardware store, a place where neighbors found everything from a box of nails to lumber for a new porch, from small hammers to machines strong enough to shape steel. I spent decades helping other people build their homes, fix their roofs, repair their fences. And now, in the last stretch of my life, I find myself for the first time trying to build something not for others but for myself. Not a house of wood and stone. No, I already had that. What I need now is a new life, a clean beginning. This change began 5 years ago, on the day everything I loved most was ripped away. My wife, Beatrice, my companion of nearly 40 years, passed from pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, and she lived exactly that. Not a day longer, not a day shorter. Punctual to the end, that was my B. She kept time the way clocks keep faith, steady and unbending. And when she was gone, I found myself in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Our place on Maple Street was filled wall to wall with memories of her. I could not step into the kitchen without hearing her voice, a soft hum floating between the chopping of onions or the stirring of stew. In the living room, her chair still sat facing the window, the yarn and needles waiting for a scarf that would never be finished. Even in my study, the one room I always called mine, she left her touch. Tiny notes tucked in drawers, bookmarks slipped between pages of books she hoped I'd read. For the first 2 years after she passed, I drifted like a ghost through those rooms. Every morning I would wake, put on the kettle, and make breakfast for 2 before catching myself, throwing half of it away. At night I sat at the table and spoke into the silence, answering the questions she might have asked, pretending she was still across from me. And when the silence grew too loud, I turned to whiskey. Never enough to drown me, but just enough to fall asleep without feeling. The empty half of the bed pressing cold against my side. My daughter Hilda would visit once a month, usually on a Sunday. She came with a grocery bag I didn't ask for and a store-bought casserole she barely touched. She would sit in Bee's chair, her back straight, lips tight, and talk about herself. The latest sale at her real estate firm, Perry's newest car, the marble counters in their remodeled kitchen. Sometimes she would pause, glance at me, and ask how I was doing, but she never listened for the answer. Her visits felt less like love and more like inspection rounds, making sure her father hadn't completely collapsed into ruin. "You need help around the house, Dad," she said every time. "I can hire someone for you, or better yet, you could move into a home. There's a very good place on the north side, clean and modern." She said it like an offer, but really it was a warning, an attempt to steer my life into her hands. I was 67. Still strong enough to carry my own groceries, fix a leaky faucet, and mow the lawn. But I could see in her eyes it wasn't my health she was thinking of. It was my savings, my house, my estate. The things she imagined already. In her grasp, her husband, Perry Drummond, appeared even less often. He was a lawyer, a smooth talker with a gleaming suit and a smile that never touched his eyes. I'd known plenty like him in my hardware days, young men who came in with expensive shoes but no calluses on their hands, who wanted everything easy and quick. Most of them broke against the real world before they hit middle age. But Perry was different. He had the shameless confidence of someone who always found the right people to flatter and the right shortcuts to take. Hilda fell for that smile 15 years ago at a party, and 6 months later she was married. Beatrice adored our daughter so completely that she forgave every flaw, or perhaps she saw them and chose to look away. I was less forgiving. Even as a child, Hilda had been calculating, figuring how to ask for more with less effort, how to get her way with tears or charm. By 20, she knew the exact price of her own smile. After B's death, Hilda became more direct in her efforts to take hold of my life. She began accidentally finding my bank statements in the mail, nudging me toward letting her manage my accounts, reminding me how important it was to protect the inheritance. I wasn't rich, but after 3 decades of running a successful business, I had solid savings, a few investments, and a house that had been paid off for 15 years. I never chased wealth, but I understood the value of work, the worth of good tools, and the power of fair prices. That was enough. By the 3rd year of widowhood, I realized something simple but painful. I could not keep living in a house that belonged more to the past than to me. Every creak in the floorboards echoed memories. Every corner carried her shadow. I needed air. I needed change. So I forced myself to step out. I joined a seniors club at the library. I walked every morning through the park, counting the ducks on the pond. I picked up an old hobby, wood carving. Even saw a therapist when the loneliness grew too heavy, and I don't mind saying it out loud. That decision alone kept me standing. Then one morning, after a long walk, I stood outside my own home and really looked at it. Not as a grieving husband, but as a man who had sold hardware for 3 decades. The truth was plain. The house was old, tired, too large for one person, and far too full of ghosts. The roof leaked, the wiring groaned, and the walls sagged under the weight of memory. It was time. Not time to forget B, never. But time to move forward, to carve out a life where memory was not a chain. That evening I called my friend Roland Quillen, a realtor I had known since his first house purchase. He was honest, loud-voiced, a man who knew every inch of Orland Park property. "Obi, good to hear from you. How's the old house?" he asked, surprise filling the silence after I told him I wanted to sell. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I said. "It's time." Within weeks, everything shifted. Roland valued the house higher than I had guessed. The market had been strong. We began touring homes, and on the 3rd visit I found it. A modern 2-story in River Glen with clean lines, wide glass windows, and a view of a pond so still it looked painted. No leaks, no creaks, no ghosts. Just space for new beginnings. Roland explained it had been bought by a banker who never moved in, leaving it practically brand new. Standing on the terrace, I breathed in the quiet air and said the words I hadn't thought I would ever say again. "I'll take it." 3 weeks later, with papers signed and dates set, I was a man with a new house and, for the first time in years, a strange, trembling sense of freedom. I told no one at first, but when the day came, I invited Hilda to lunch. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown. She arrived late, heels striking the floor, her new ivory suit gleaming, a bag at her side that likely cost more than most retirees make in a month. "Sorry, Dad. Clients," she said, brushing her lips against my cheek. She sat across from me, adjusted her chair, and looked me over. "You look good. New shirt?" "It's old," I said, smiling faintly. "I just haven't worn it in a while." Her eyes lit as she leaned forward. "Things are great. Perry's working on a new deal, very promising, with a major land developer. If it goes through, we're thinking of upgrading, maybe even buying a bigger house." I nodded slowly, the same way I always did when she spoke of her ambitions, hearing her words but feeling the distance between us stretch wider than the table. Typical Hilda, always striving for more, never satisfied with what she has. I have news too, I said after we ordered. I sold the house. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. What did you do? I sold the house on Maple Street. The deal is already closed. I'm moving in a week. But she blinked, trying to process the information. Where? To a nursing home. Why didn't you discuss this with me? No, not a nursing home. I took a sip of water from my glass. I bought a new house in River Glen. River Glen? Her voice rose an octave. Only millionaires live there. Not exactly. People who can afford houses in River Glen live there. As it turns out, I'm one of them. Hilda put down her fork and looked at me intently. Dad, are you sure this is wise? It's a lot of money? And why do you need such an expensive house at your age? There it was. Not concern for my well-being, but fear for her future assets. At my age, Hilda, people often think about how to live the rest of their lives in maximum comfort. I decided I deserved a nice house after 40 years at work. But the old house was beautiful. Mom loved it. It's full of memories. That's exactly why I decided to move. I looked her straight in the eye. Too many ghosts. I want to live in the present, not the past. Hilda took a deep breath, clearly trying to contain her irritation. Did you at least consult with a financial advisor? This is a huge expense. I worked with Roland Quillen. You know him. He's a professional. Roland gets a commission on the sale. Of course, he advised you to buy an expensive house. Hilda, I said calmly but firmly, I spent 32 years running a hardware store. I know the value of money and the value of things. I know how much houses cost and how much my new house costs. It was a reasonable deal. She looked at me as if I were a naughty child. Can I at least know how much you paid? I named the amount. Her eyes widened. That's almost all your savings. Not all, a reasonable portion. Dad, this is crazy. What if you need money for medical treatment? For help around the house? For I have excellent health insurance and enough money in my accounts? Besides, the new house doesn't need constant repairs, unlike the old one. I've thought it through, Hilda. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. I think Perry and I should take a look at those calculations. And the paperwork for the deal. Perry could. No, I shook my head. The deal is closed. The paperwork is in order. I don't need Perry to check it. You don't trust your own son-in-law? Her tone became accusatory. It's not about trust. It's about the fact that it's my decision and my money. Hilda fell silent, clearly considering a new strategy. Finally, she smiled. That fake smile she used when she wanted something. All right, Dad, if you're sure. When can we see your new house? I'm planning a housewarming party in 2 weeks when I'm done moving. I'll invite you, Perry, and a few friends. Maybe we could help you move, she offered with feigned concern. Thanks, but I hired a company. They'll do everything professionally. That costs money, too, she remarked. Reasonable money, I parried. The rest of the dinner was tense. Hilda tried to get more details about the deal, the new house, my plans for the remaining savings. I answered evasively without giving her any specific information. When we said goodbye at the restaurant entrance, she kissed me on the cheek again, but her eyes remained cold. Call me if you need help with the move, she said. I will, I replied, knowing I wouldn't. Watching her walk to her car, I realized she would immediately call Perry and tell him about my crazy decision. They would surely try to find a way to intervene, perhaps even contest the deal, but it was too late. The papers were signed, the money had been transferred, and the keys to my new home were in my pocket. I sighed and walked to my car. A move and a new chapter in my life lay ahead. Hilda was unhappy that I was spending her inheritance on my own comfort, but I didn't care anymore. At 72, I had finally learned to live for myself, not for other people's expectations, and my new house in River Glen was the first step on that path. You are absolutely right. I am not following the plan correctly. I apologize for that. I will rewrite the chapter strictly following the plan where Hilda kicks Obadiah out of his own house at the end and he actually leaves. The move went surprisingly smoothly. A professional team of movers packed my belongings, loaded them into a van, and delivered them to my new home in one day. I took with me only what really mattered to me. Photos of Beatrice, her favorite rocking chair, my wood-carving tools, and my collection of old vinyl records. I took the bare minimum of everyday items, clothes, dishes, bedding, and kitchen utensils. I sold or gave away old furniture, unnecessary items, and household goods to neighbors and acquaintances. The first night in the new house was strange, too quiet, too empty, too new. The polished wooden floors didn't cack under my feet. The windows opened effortlessly. The water pipes didn't hum when I turned on the tap. No ghosts, no memories, a clean slate. I settled down on the terrace with a glass of whiskey, looking at the dark surface of the pond, which reflected the stars. On the opposite shore, the windows of neighboring houses were lit up. My new neighbors were successful business people, doctors, lawyers, people who could afford to live in a prestigious neighborhood. I wondered what they would think of an elderly hardware store owner. In the morning, I began to settle in. I arranged the books on the shelves in the study, hung up a few paintings I had brought with me, and placed Beatrix's rocking chair by the window in the living room. I didn't have many belongings, and most of the rooms remained empty. I decided that I would gradually fill the house with new furniture, taking my time and choosing each item wisely. At noon, Roland called to find out how the move went and if everything was okay with the house. Everything's great, Roland. The movers. We're professionals and the house is exactly what I wanted. Glad to hear it, Obi. Are you planning a housewarming party? Yes. This weekend I'll invite my daughter and son-in-law and a couple of old friends. You should come too. I'd love to, just not on Saturday. My daughter has her school graduation Sunday at 3 in the afternoon. Nothing fancy, just a small reception. I'll definitely be there. Did you tell Hilda about the move? She knows I bought a house, but she hasn't seen it yet. How did she react to the news? I smiled. What do you think? She thinks I spent too much money and is worried that there won't be much left of her inheritance. Roland paused. You know, I've been meaning to tell you. I think Hilda is a little, how can I put it? Selfish, he suggested. Yes, I suppose so. Sorry if I'm meddling. It's okay, Roland. I know my daughter. After talking to Roland, I went to the nearest supermarket to buy groceries. My new home was in a much more convenient location than my old one, just a 5-minute drive from a shopping center that had everything it needed, a grocery store, a pharmacy, household goods. When I got home, I put the groceries away in my brand new kitchen and decided to call Hilda to officially invite her to my housewarming party. Hilda Drummond speaking, she answered in a businesslike tone. Hi, sweetie. It's Dad. Dad? Her voice immediately softened. How did the move go? Is everything okay? Everything's great. I'm calling to invite you and Perry to the housewarming party on Sunday at 3 in the afternoon. Sunday? She thought for a moment. Yes, we're free. Do you need us to bring anything? Nothing. Just come. Okay. Should we give Roland the address? I already invited him and a couple of other friends. Great. We'll definitely be there. I can't wait to see your new house. Her voice sounded genuinely curious. Maybe she had already gotten used to the idea of my purchase, or maybe she just wanted to see how much I had spent when she saw the house with her own eyes. I spent the next few days settling into the house and preparing to receive guests. I ordered food from a catering service, bought wine and soft drinks, and arranged for the gardener from the management company to tidy up the backyard. On Sunday, at exactly 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Hilda and Perry were standing on the doorstep, both dressed as if they were coming to a business meeting. Hilda was holding a bottle of champagne. Dad. She kissed me on the cheek. What a wonderful neighborhood, and the house looks impressive. Perry shook my hand. Mr. Pennywell, congratulations on your purchase. You've made an excellent choice. I invited them in. I watched as they looked around the spacious hall with its high ceiling, the living room with its panoramic windows, and the kitchen with its marble countertops and state-of-the-art appliances. Their eyes took in every detail, every piece of furniture, every square foot of space. It's magnificent, Hilda finally said when we stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the pond. Even better than I imagined. Yes, it's a truly premium location, Perry added, sipping the wine I had offered him. I think you've made a wise investment, Mr. Penny. Well, real estate in this area is only going up in value. Soon other guests arrived, Roland and his wife and two old friends of mine, Archie Blackwell, with whom I started my business, and Malcolm Drayton, a former supplier to my store. We sat on the terrace, eating, drinking, and talking. Hilda and Perry kept a little apart from the others, whispering to each other. When most of the guests moved into the living room where Archie was telling some funny story from our past, Hilda took me aside. "Dad, can we talk in private?" she asked, looking at me with that special smile I knew so well. She used to smile like that when she wanted a new doll as a child or money for a fashionable dress as a teenager. "Of course," I said, leading her into my study and closing the door. "What did you want to talk about?" Hilda looked around the room, the dark wood desk, the bookshelves, the leather armchair. Then she turned to me. "This house is really amazing, Dad. I never imagined that I could afford this." I finished for her. No, she shook her head. But we both knew I was right. I just didn't expect you to want to live in such a big house. It's huge for one person. I like the space. Yes. But she paused. Maintaining a house like this costs a lot of money. Utilities, cleaning, a gardener. I've thought it through, Hilda. I can afford to maintain this house right now. Yes. But what about in 5 years, 10 years? She moved closer and put her hand on my shoulder. Dad, I'm worried about you. At your age, you shouldn't be taking on such financial commitments. There it was. At your age again, as if 72 was almost death. I'm in great shape, Hilda, and so are my finances. But what if you get sick? What if you need constant care? I have excellent health insurance and enough savings. What you spent on this house? She raised her voice, but immediately caught herself and spoke more quietly. I'm sorry. I'm just worried. There was a knock at the door, and Perry peeked into the office. Everything okay? He asked, looking from to Hilda. Yes, dear, Hilda replied. We're just discussing something with Dad. Would you like to join us? Perry came in and closed the door behind him. I felt as if I were trapped in my own study. Mr. Pennywell, Perry began with. That smile I disliked so much. Hilda is very concerned about you, and so am I. This house belongs to me, I interrupted. And I don't understand why we have to discuss this now during the housewarming. Of course, Perry raised, his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Hilda and I just thought of a possible solution that could secure you financially. I crossed my arms over my chest. And what is that solution? Hilda and Perry exchanged glances. Then Hilda said, We think you should transfer the house to me. Legally, you understand? You'll still live here, but I'll be the official owner. I looked at my daughter, not believing my ears. Why would I do that? To protect your assets, Perry interjected. At your age, there is a risk of various medical problems. If you need specialized care, the government may seize your property to cover the costs. But if the house is registered to Hilda, they won't be able to touch it, and it will simplify the inheritance process. Hilda added, There won't be any problems with wills, inheritance, taxes, or other bureaucracy. I looked at the two of them, my daughter and her husband, and felt anger rising inside me. They didn't even try to hide their true motives. You want me to give you the house I just bought? I asked, trying to sound calm. You didn't give it to us, Dad, Hilda replied. You just transferred the title. You can live here as long as you want. That's very generous of you, I said, not hiding my sarcasm. What if you want to sell it or mortgage it? Well, in that case, we'll have to discuss it, Perry said. Since legally the house will belong to Hilda, so I won't be able to dispose of. My own property. It's for your own safety, Dad, Hilda insisted. We want to protect you from what? From my own decisions. From financial risks in old age, Perry said. Do you know how many elderly people fall victim to scammers or make rash financial decisions because of early dementia? Are you implying that I have dementia? I raised my voice. No, of course not, Perry said quickly. But the risk is there for all people your age. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I'm not going to transfer the house to Hilda or anyone else. It's my house bought, with my money, and I'll do with it as I see fit. Hilda's face contorted with anger. You don't understand what you're doing. Her voice rose. It's irresponsible. You're throwing away our future. Ours. I raised an eyebrow. It's my money, Hilda, not yours. Money that should have gone to me and my children. You don't have any children, I reminded her. That doesn't matter, she almost shouted. You should be thinking about your family, not spending everything on your whims. My house is not a whim, and I have every right to spend my money as I see fit. Not if you're becoming senile, Hilda blurted out. A heavy silence hung in the room. I looked at my daughter, not believing my ears. Do you think I'm senile? I asked quietly. I didn't mean that, Hilda muttered, but her eyes said otherwise. Yes, that's exactly what you meant. I straightened up. To my full height. You think I'm incapable of making rational decisions, that I should give you control over my life and my money? Dad, listen. No, you listen. My voice was firm. I'm not senile, I'm not irresponsible, and I'm not going to sign my house over to you or anyone else. Period. Hilda turned to Perry. Tell him, explain that he's making a mistake. Perry looked uncomfortable. Mr. Penny, well, we really think this would be the best solution for everyone. For everyone, I smirked. Or for you? You're being unfair? Perry tried to maintain a professional calm. We're thinking about your well-being. No, you're thinking about my money. I turned toward the door. This conversation is over. I suggest we get back to our guests. No, Hilda stood between me and the door. We're not done. I'm done. I tried to get around her, but she didn't move. You don't understand what you're doing. She grabbed my arm. It's my money, my inheritance. You have no right to spend it on such nonsense. Hilda, calm down. Perry put his hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. No, he has to understand. Her face flushed with anger. You're a selfish old man. You always thought only of yourself. You even drove Mom to don't you dare talk about my mother. I interrupted her, feeling anger boiling up inside me. Don't you dare use her name in your manipulations. Do you want the truth? Hilda came closer, her eyes flashing. She complained to me about you. She said you never listened to her, that you always did things your own way. She was unhappy with you. It was a blow below the belt. I felt my heart tightened with pain and anger. You're lying, I said quietly. Beatrice would never say that. How do you know? You never listened to her. Just like you're not listening to me now. Hilda, Perry tried to intervene. Maybe we should continue this conversation another time. No. She pushed him away. He has to understand. Either he transfers the house to me or I don't want anything to do with him. Perry looked shocked. Hilda, you can't talk like that. He's your father. He's not my father if he doesn't care about my future. She turned to me. Choose Dad. The house or me? I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. This woman with a face, contorted with rage, was a stranger. Not the little girl I remembered. Not the one Beatrice and I loved so much. I won't choose, Hilda, I said. This is my house, and I'm not going to sign it over. Her face contorted with rage. Then get out, she shouted, pushing me in the chest. Dad, get out now. I was so stunned that I took a step back. "Hilda!" Perry tried to grab her arm, but she pushed him away. "I said get out!" She continued to advance on me. "This should be my home. You ruined everything. I found myself pinned against the wall." Hilda was beside herself with rage. Her face was red, her eyes were flashing, her hands were clenched into fists. "Hilda," I began, but she didn't let me finish. "No, not another word." She pointed to the door. "Get out now." Perry finally stepped between us. "Mr. Pennywell," he said quietly, "maybe you really should leave, at least for a little while. Let her calm down." I looked at him suspiciously. "Are you suggesting I leave my own house?" "Just for a little while." Perry looked uncomfortable. "I'll call you when she comes to her senses." "I won't come to my senses," Hilda shouted behind him. "He has to leave for good. This house is mine." I was shocked. My own daughter was kicking me out of the house I had bought with my own money, and her husband, instead of stopping her, was suggesting that I give in. "Please," Perry lowered his voice. "She's 'nother self. I'm afraid she might do something she'll regret later." I looked at Hilda, who was standing behind her husband, her face contorted with anger. At that moment, I didn't recognize her as my daughter. She was a stranger, a greedy woman, willing to do anything for money. "All right," I said finally. "I'll leave. But this is my house, Hilda, and I'll be back." "Don't come back," she shouted as I headed for the door. "Get out and don't you dare come back." I left the office feeling my hands tremble. Roland met me in the hallway. "Obi, what happened?" he asked, seeing my condition. "Hilda is kicking me out." "Of the house," I said, still not believing what was happening. "What?" Roland looked shocked. "Why?" "Because I refused to sign it over to her." Roland frowned. "It's your house, Obi. You shouldn't leave." "I know, but I couldn't find the words. I've never seen her like this. She's beside herself." At that moment, the study door flew open and Hilda stormed out, still red with anger. "Why are you still here?" she shouted when she saw me. "I told you to get out." Roland stepped between us. "Hilda, calm down. This is your father's house." "No, this should be my house. He spent my money." "It's his money," Roland said firmly. "And his house." "Shut up." Hilda tried to push Roland away, but he didn't budge. "It's your fault. You sold him this stupid house." Perry came out of the study and put his hand on her shoulder. "Hilda, please, let go." She shook his hand off. "Either he leaves or I call the police." "On what grounds?" Roland asked. "It's his house. He's a senile old man. He's incapable of making decisions. We'll file for guardianship." "And enough," I interrupted her. "I'm leaving." "Obi, no," Roland began, but I shook my head. "I don't want a scene in front of the guests," I said quietly. "And I don't want to see what my daughter has become." I turned and walked toward the exit. I could feel their eyes on my back. Roland shocked, Hilda's triumphant, Perry's confused. Once outside, I took a deep breath of the fresh evening air. My new home, my new start. It was all falling apart before my eyes. I got in the car, not knowing where I was going, but I knew one thing. I would never forgive Hilda for what she'd done today, and I would never let her take away what was rightfully mine. That evening remained in my memory as a blurred spot of anger, pain, and humiliation. I sat behind the wheel of my car, not knowing where to go. My new home, bought with money earned through decades of hard work, was left behind, and in it was my daughter, who had kicked me, her father, out like a stray dog. My hands were shaking, so badly that I could barely hold the steering wheel. At some point, I just pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. I sat in silence, watching the twilight descend, trying to comprehend what had happened. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, had kicked me out of my own home. How was that possible? The phone rang, snapping me out of my stupor. "Roland, Obi, where are you?" His voice sounded alarmed. In the car, not far from home. Listen, what happened? It's crazy. You shouldn't have left. What choice did I have? I smiled bitterly. Call the police on my own daughter. Maybe. Roland's voice was angry. What she did was betrayal? I finished for him. I know. Where are you? Going to spend the night? Roland asked after a pause. I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. Obi. His voice softened. Come stay with us. We have a guest room. Stay as long as you need. I don't want to be a burden. Don't be silly. Marion and I would be happy to have you. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do next. I hesitated. My pride demanded that I refuse, that I find some other solution, but I was too exhausted, too shaken to argue. Thank you, Roland. I'll come. Roland and Marion Quillen's house was in the old part of Orland Park, just a 15-minute drive from my new, or rather former, home. It was a modest but cozy 2-story house with a neat garden. When I pulled up, Roland was already waiting for me on the porch. I sent the other guests home, he said, helping me with the small bag I had managed to grab before leaving. I told them, You suddenly had back pain. I hope you don't mind. Thank you. I was grateful that he had spared me the need to explain what had happened. Marion Quillen, a short woman with kind eyes and silver hair, met us at the door. Obadiah. She hugged me. Roland told me everything. I'm so sorry. Thank you for taking me in, Marion. Don't be silly. You can stay here as long as you need. The guest. Room was small but cozy. There was a double bed, a dresser, and a small desk by the window. On the walls were watercolor landscapes painted by Marion herself. She was a talented amateur artist. The bathroom is across the hall, Marion pointed out. Towels are in the closet. If you need anything, just let me know. You must be hungry, Roland asked. Marion made dinner. I wanted to refuse. I couldn't swallow a bite, but I knew I had to eat. It had been a long and exhausting day. Thank you. I'll just get changed. When they left, I sat down on the edge of the bed and covered my face with my hands. The situation seemed unreal, like a bad dream. Yesterday, I was the owner of a luxurious house in a prestigious neighborhood, making plans for a new life. Today, I am a homeless old man, dependent on the kindness of friends. I took a photo of Beatrice out of my bag, one of the few things I had managed to grab before leaving. She was smiling in the photo, her eyes shining with that special warmth that only she had. What would she say now? What would she do in my place? At dinner, Roland and Marion tried not to talk about what had happened, for which I was grateful. We discussed neutral topics, the weather, a new movie they had recently seen, Marion's plans for her garden plot. Only when Marion went to the kitchen, to get dessert did Roland lean over to me. We need to talk to a lawyer tomorrow. What Hilda did is illegal. You can sue her. I don't want to sue my own daughter, I said wearily. She kicked you out of your house, Obi. This isn't just a family quarrel. It's a serious crime. I shook my head. Give me time to think. It all happened too fast. Roland nodded, although I could see from his face that he didn't agree with my position. I hardly slept that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day in my head. I remembered Hilda's face contorted with anger. Her words, Dad, get out now. How did we get to this point? When did my little girl, whom I once rocked in my arms, turn into this greedy, spiteful woman? At breakfast that morning, Roland returned to the conversation about the lawyer. I have a friend, Alfred Coleman. He's an excellent specialist in family and property law. I've already spoken to him. He can see us today at 2D. Roland, I haven't decided yet. Just talk to him, Roland insisted. Hear what he has to say. Then you can decide. In the end, I agreed. Not so much because I wanted to sue Hilda, but to appease Roland. Alfred Coleman turned out to be a thin man in his 50s with piercing eyes and a neat gray beard. His office was located in an old building in the center of Orland Park. "Mr. Pennywell?" He shook my hand. "Roland told me about your situation." "I'm very sorry." I nodded, not knowing what to say. "Let's clarify the details," Coleman continued, opening his notebook. "You recently purchased a house entirely with your own funds. The documents are in your name. Is that correct?" "Yes. The deal was closed, and Weeks ago and yesterday, your daughter and her husband effectively kicked you out of your own home. Was physical violence used?" "No," shook my head. "Only verbal threats." "Were there any witnesses to the incident?" "Roland." I nodded toward my friend and the other guests, but they probably didn't hear our conversation. We were in the study. Coleman made a few notes in his notebook. "From a legal standpoint, the situation is clear, Mr. Pennywell. It's your property. No one has the right to evict you from your home. You can contact the police immediately, and they'll remove your daughter and her husband from the premises." I sighed. The thought of the police removing Hilda from the house was unbearable, despite everything she had done. "Are there any other options?" "Of course," Coleman nodded. "We can send a formal letter demanding that they vacate the premises within 48 hours. If they don't comply, then we'll have to call the police." "What if I just wait?" I asked. "Maybe she'll calm down and come to her senses." Coleman and Roland exchanged glances. "I'm afraid that's not the best strategy," Coleman said gently. "The longer they stay in the house, the harder it will be to evict them. They may start claiming that this is their primary residence. They wouldn't dare." I was sure of that. They have their own house. Speaking of which, Coleman leaned forward. "Roland mentioned that your daughter's husband, Perry Drummond, may be involved in some shady deals. Do you know any details?" Shrugged. "Only that Hilda sometimes hinted at his special working methods. He's a lawyer specializing in real estate transactions. As far as I understand, he doesn't always act strictly according to the law." Coleman thought that could be important. "I'll do a little digging. I have some contacts in legal circles. Maybe I can find out something concrete." "Why?" I asked. "What does that have to do with my house directly?" "Perhaps nothing," Coleman admitted. "But information is power, Mr. Pennywell. The more we know about the situation, the better we can prepare for any surprises." I agreed, although I wasn't sure it was necessary. It seemed to me that the situation was already crystal clear. The house was mine. Hilda was wrong, and sooner or later, she would have to admit it. Coleman promised to contact me in a couple of days when he had gathered more information. Roland and I returned to his house where Marion had already prepared dinner. "What are you planning to do next?" Roland asked as we sat in the backyard with cups of coffee. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to go back right now and kick them out. It's my house, damn it." But another part I paused, searching for the right words. Another part just can't believe it's come to this. That my own daughter could do such a thing. "People change, Obi," Roland said quietly. "Not always for the better." "She was such a sweet girl," I said, staring into space, remembering. Beatrice adored her. I can't stop thinking that I did something wrong, that I missed something important in her upbringing. "Don't blame yourself," Roland said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Adults make their own choices. You are not responsible for Hilda's decisions." I nodded, even though deep down I didn't agree with him. Parents are always responsible for their children to some extent, even when they are long grown up. The next few days passed in a strange state of limbo. I stayed with Roland and Marion, trying to keep myself busy so I wouldn't think about what had happened all the time. I helped Marion in the garden, repaired an old garden hose that had been leaking for a long time, and made a small shelf for her collection of ceramic birds. But my thoughts kept returning to the house and to Hilda. I was tempted to call her several times, but each time I put the phone down. What could I say? I'm sorry, I spent my money on a house instead of leaving it to you as an inheritance. I'm sorry I didn't die in time. Bitterness and resentment overwhelmed me, leaving no room for words of reconciliation. On the third day, Alfred Coleman called. Mr. Pennywell, I have some information that may be of interest to you. Can we meet? An hour later, we were sitting in his office, and Coleman was laying out folders of documents in front of us. Your son-in-law, Mr. Drummond, is indeed involved in some very questionable deals, he began. According to my sources, a quiet investigation is already underway against him. The district attorney's office is gathering evidence to bring charges of fraud, forgery, and tax crimes. I whistled. How serious is it? Very serious. Coleman tapped one of the documents with his finger. We're talking about multi-million-dollar real estate deals where Mr. Drummond represented both sides, which is a violation in itself. What's more, there is evidence that he manipulated property valuations, created shell companies to conduct transactions, and evaded taxes. What does that mean for me? I asked, trying to understand how this information related to my situation. It means that Mr. Drummond's assets and possibly your daughter's may be seized in the near future, Coleman explained, including their house. Oh my God, I leaned back in my chair. Does Hilda know about this? It's hard to say. According to my sources, Mr. Drummond kept most of his affairs secret, even from those close to him, but given the scale of the operations, she must have. At least suspected that something was wrong. Their lifestyle clearly exceeded their official income. I remembered Hilda's designer clothes, her new car, her luxurious jewelry. I always thought they just earned a lot of money. Now, everything took on a new meaning. What do you suggest we do? I asked. Coleman folded his hands on the table. From a legal standpoint, the most sensible thing would be to return to your home immediately, file a formal complaint with the police, and evict your daughter and son-in-law. Given the circumstances, you should distance yourself from them as soon as possible. I thought about it. Part of me wanted exactly that, to restore justice, to get back what was rightfully mine. But another part couldn't help thinking about Hilda. Despite everything she had done, she was still my daughter. If Perry was indeed under investigation, she was in for a rough time. What if I don't get involved? I asked. What if I just let things take their course? You're taking a risk, Coleman replied honestly. If your house is associated with Drummond's assets, it could be seized. It will take time and effort to prove that it is your property and has no connection to your son-in-law's affairs, but it's possible. Possible. Yes, you have all the documents proving the legality of the purchase. The source of the funds is clean. The only problem could arise from the fact that they are actually living there now. I rubbed my nose, feeling a headache. Coming on, I need to think about it. Of course, Coleman nodded. But don't delay your decision. The situation could develop quickly. On the way home, Roland tried to convince me to act immediately. This is crazy, Obi. You have to get your house back now before it becomes the center of a criminal case. I know, I said. But it's not that simple. Why? Because Hilda is your daughter after what she did. That's exactly why, I looked at him. She's my daughter, the only thing I have left of Beatrice. I can't just what? Do the right thing? Protect yourself? I didn't answer. There were no words that could explain my feelings. A mixture of love, disappointment, anger, and inexpressible sadness. That evening, sitting in the guest room, I stared at Beatrice's photo for a long time. What would she say now? How would she act? Beatrice was always kind, always ready to forgive. But she was also fair, and couldn't stand blatant lies. After much thought, I made a decision. I would not take any active measures against Hilda, but I would not help her get out of the situation she had created for herself either. Let events take their course, and whatever will be, will be. Coleman was not happy when I told him my decision, but here respected my choice. He promised to keep me informed if any new information about Perry's case came to light. A week passed. I was getting used to my new routine. Breakfast with Roland and Marion, helping around the house and garden, long walks in the neighborhood, evenings spent reading books or watching television. Hilda didn't call, and I didn't try to contact her either. The wound was too fresh. And then, exactly 1 week after that fateful day when I was kicked out of my own home, the phone rang. Hilda. I stared at the phone screen for a long time, not daring to answer. Finally, taking a deep breath, I pressed the green button. Yes, Dad. Her voice sounded frightened, on the verge of hysteria. Dad, we need your help. We've been evicted. People from the prosecutor's office. They took our house and yours too. They said all our property has been seized. We don't know what to do. Perry says it's a mistake, a misunderstanding, but they won't listen to anyone. Dad, help. I listened to her panicked monologue, feeling strangely calm. The wheel of fortune had turned full circle. Now Hilda was in the same situation she had put me in a week ago. Homeless, uncertain about tomorrow, dependent on the kindness of others. Where are you now? I asked. In a motel on the outskirts of town. It's a terrible place, Dad. It's dirty and scary here. Perry is trying to contact lawyers, but no one is answering. I don't know what to do. What exactly happened? People came with warrants this morning. Lots of people, police, agents from the prosecutor's office. They said Perry was under investigation and that all his assets had been seized. They gave us an hour to pack. 1 hour, Dad. I barely had time to gather the bare essentials. And now they've taken your house too. Our things are still there. This is some kind of mistake, right? I don't think it's a mistake, Hilda, I said calmly. Perry really is under investigation, and it's pretty serious. You knew? Her voice was filled with disbelief. You knew and didn't tell me. I found out a few days ago after you kicked me out of my own house. There was a pause. I could almost see her struggling with herself, trying to decide whether to apologize for the past or focus on the current problem. Dad, please. Her voice took on a leading tone. We need your help. We have nowhere else to go. What about your friends? I asked. I'm sure you have many friends among the successful people of Orland Park. They don't answer their phones, she said more quietly, as if ashamed to admit it. Or they say they can't take us in. They're afraid to be associated with us while the investigation is ongoing. So that's how it is. Hilda and Perry's social circle, built on ostentatious wealth and status, crumbled as soon as they got into trouble. Not surprising, but sad. Dad, her voice trembled. We've been evicted. Help us. Can we stay with you at least for a few days until we figure out what to do next? I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to say no, to remind her how she had kicked me out a week ago. But another part, the part that still remembered her as the little girl I taught to ride a bike, couldn't refuse. I need to think about it, Hilda, and talk to my lawyer. The situation is more complicated than you realize. Please, Dad. Her voice was desperate. We can't stay here. We have almost no money. All our accounts are frozen. I'll call you back, I said. Give me a couple of hours. I hung up and took a deep breath. The irony of the situation did not escape me. A week ago, Hilda was yelling, Dad, get out now, as she kicked me out of my own house. Now she was begging for help, having been left on the street because of her husband's machinations. I chose the Bluebird Cafe for my meeting with Hilda and Perry for a reason. It was a quiet, unassuming place in the old part of Orland Park, far from the fashionable areas where they were used to hanging out. Secluded enough to talk without prying ears, but still public enough to prevent any emotional scenes Hilda might cause. Roland was strongly opposed to this meeting. Why are you doing this, Obi? He protested when I told him my decision. After everything they've done, she's my daughter, I said, not fully understanding my own motives. I have to at least listen to them. You don't owe them anything. Roland shook his head, especially after she kicked you out of your own home. I didn't argue. Roland was right, and part of me agreed with him, but another part, the part that remembered Hilda as a little girl with pigtails who fell asleep in my arms after a long day at the amusement park, couldn't just turn away from her in her time of need. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes before the appointed time. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat down at a table in the far corner from where I could see the whole room. I watched the few visitors, an elderly couple enthusiastically discussing a newspaper article, a young woman with a laptop, probably a student, a lonely middle-aged man staring thoughtfully out the window, ordinary people with ordinary concerns. I wonder if they have problems with their children who consider their parents' money to be their inheritance. At exactly 11 the cafe door opened and Hilda and Perry walked in. I barely recognized them. Only a week had passed since Hilda kicked me out of the house, but they looked as if they had aged several years. Hilda was wearing no makeup with dark circles under her eyes and simple, slightly rumpled clothes. Perry, always so dapper, was wearing a wrinkled shirt and had stubble on his cheeks. They looked around nervously until they spotted me in the corner. Dad. Hilda approached the table and hesitated for a moment, not knowing whether to hug me or just sit down. I didn't make a move toward her, and she awkwardly sat down in the chair, across from me. Mr. Pennywell. Perry nodded at me, his face a mixture of shame and anxiety. Hilda Perry? I nodded back, keeping a neutral expression on my face. Would you like to order anything? Yes, please. Hilda looked grateful for the simple question. I'd like some coffee. Me too, Perry added. I called the waitress over and placed our order. When she left, there was an awkward pause. Hilda fiddled with her napkin, avoiding my gaze. Perry studied his hands as if seeing them for the first time. So, I finally said, You wanted to talk? Yes. Hilda looked up. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying a lot. Dad, I'm so sorry. What happened a week ago? I wasn't myself. I shouldn't have said those awful things, and I certainly shouldn't have kicked you out of your own house. I don't know what came over me. Greed, I said calmly. Greed came over you, Hilda. She flinched as if I had hit her. It was wrong, she admitted quietly. I understand that now, and I'm truly sorry. Me too, Perry added. What we did, it's unforgivable. Should have stopped, Hilda, but I didn't. I have no excuse. I looked at them. These two broken people, so unlike the confident couple who had thrown me out a week ago. Part of me felt satisfaction at the change. Another part felt pity. What exactly happened? I asked. To your house and mine? Perry ran his hand over his face as if trying to wipe away the fatigue. Federal. Agents came with search and seizure warrants. They're investigating fraud and money laundering at Global Invest. I advised them on some real estate deals, but I swear I didn't know about any illegal activity. He said the last sentence with such insistence that it was immediately clear he was lying. They froze all our accounts, Hilda continued. They seized our house, our cars, even my jewelry. They said it could all have been purchased with illegal income. And then they came to your house. We explained that it was your property, but they said that since we live there and you are my father and Perry consulted for Global Invest in that house, he is also subject to arrest until the circumstances are clarified. I understand, I nodded. Coleman had warned me about this possibility. And what do you plan to do next? They looked at each other as if unsure who should speak. We were hoping you could help us, Hilda finally said. At least temporarily. The money for the motel will soon run out and we have no place to live. No jobs? No jobs? I raised an eyebrow. What about your real estate firm? They asked me to leave, Hilda said, lowering her eyes. They said they couldn't risk their reputation while the investigation was ongoing. They didn't even let me collect my things from the office. What about your law practice, Perry? Suspended, he said quietly, almost in a whisper. The Bar Association has launched its own investigation. I'm facing disbarment and jail time. I asked bluntly. Perry flinched. I hope it doesn't come to that. My lawyer says that if I cooperate with the investigation, I might get off with a suspended sentence. The waitress brought our coffee. We were silent while she set out the cups. When she left, I took a sip and looked at Hilda. "What exactly do you want from me?" "A place to stay," she said bluntly. "We have nowhere to go, Dad. Everyone has turned their backs on us. You're our only hope." "You want to live with me?" I clarified. "If possible," Hilda nodded. "Just until we get back on our feet. It's temporary, I promise. I'll find a new job, Perry. Perry will figure something out, too. We'll help around the house, cook, do whatever's needed." "But I don't have a home," I reminded her. "You said yourself that my house has been seized." "Yes, but Hilda hesitated. You can prove it's yours. You have all the documents. It's just a matter of time and legal fees," I added, "and nerves and time that I could spend more usefully." "We'll help," Hilda said quickly. "Perry knows some good lawyers who, like him, could end up under investigation." I shook my head. "Not Hank, you." Hilda looked desperate. "Dad, please, we really regret what happened. We were terrible to you, but can't you give us a second chance? Isn't that what you taught me when I was a child? To forgive mistakes?" "Mistakes?" "Yes." I took another sip of coffee. "But what you did wasn't a mistake." "Hilda, it was a conscious choice. You kicked me out of my own house because I refused to sign it over to you, because you thought my money should belong to you. That's not a mistake. That's betrayal." She lowered her head, and I saw a tear fall onto the tabletop. "I know," she whispered, "and I don't know how to make it up to you, but I'm asking you. I'm begging you. Help us. Not for my sake, but for Mom's. She would want you to help her daughter in her time of need." The mention of Beatrix stung me, using the memory of my mother in such a manipulative way. Hilda hadn't changed, despite all her assurances. "I'll think about it," I said neutrally. "But first I need to clarify something. You lived in my house all last week, right?" They nodded. "And Perry worked there, holding business meetings, making phone calls." "Yes," Perry admitted. "Several clients came for consultations, including representatives from Global Invest. So, you basically turned my house into a center for fraudulent operations," I summarized. "That's why the federal agents arrested him." "We didn't think," Hilda began, but I interrupted her. "You didn't think exactly. You didn't think about me or the consequences of your actions. You only thought about yourselves as always." There was a heavy pause. Hilda stared into her cup. Perry nervously fiddled with his shirt cuff. "I can't help you," I finally said. "Dad, please." Hilda's voice sounded desperate. "We'll change, I swear. We realize our mistakes. That's not the point." I smiled calmly. "I really can't help you because I no longer have the financial resources to do so." "What do you mean?" Hilda frowned. "You have savings, a pension." "I did?" I nodded. "But I spent a significant portion on the house and the rest. Let's just say I invested it in another project." "What project?" Perry leaned forward, suddenly interested. I leaned back in my chair and looked at them both. "You know, when I was kicked out of my own house, I was in shock. I couldn't believe my own daughter was capable of such a thing. But then, when the initial shock wore off, I started to think and analyze the situation. I paused to take a sip of coffee. They looked at me with intense attention. I turned to a lawyer, Alfred Coleman, an excellent specialist, by the way. He quickly found out that Perry was involved in shady deals and that the investigation was already in full swing. It was obvious that sooner or later everything would come to light and you would find yourselves in exactly the position you are in. Now, you knew? Hilda looked shocked. You knew we would be evicted? I suspected it was a possibility. I nodded, and I decided to prepare for it. You see, when I realized that my house would most likely be seized because of your schemes, I could have immediately gone to the police and evicted you. It would have been legal and fair. Why didn't you do that? Perry asked. Good question, I smiled. Partly out of sentimentality. Hilda is my daughter after all, partly out of curiosity. I wanted to see how far you would go, but mainly because I had another plan. I took another sip of coffee, savoring the moment. Their faces showed a mixture of confusion and anxiety. Coleman introduced me to some interesting people, financiers, asset managers, and we developed a strategy. I set up a shell company called Riverview Investments. It's only been in existence for a week, and its only asset is a claim on my house. A claim? Perry asked, frowning. As a lawyer, he was beginning to understand where I was going with this. Yes. The day before the feds came with their warrants, I officially filed a lawsuit for unlawful seizure of my property. Not against you personally. That would have been too obvious, but against Global Invest. I claimed that they, through their representative Perry, had illegally occupied my house to conduct fraudulent operations, and I sold the rights to this lawsuit to Riverview Investments. Why? Hilda looked confused. Why create a company and sell it the rights to a lawsuit? Because the feds can't seize what doesn't belong to them, Perry explained, his face pale. If the house is the subject of a lawsuit and the rights to the claim are sold to a third party, it can't be seized as part of Global Invest assets. Exactly. I nodded. Riverview Investments is a company that is not formally associated with me. It has legal grounds to claim my house from seizure, and it will most likely do so successfully given the circumstances of the case and the fact that I have all the documents proving my ownership. But it's your company, Hilda began to understand. You created it? No. I shook my head. Officially, it was created by an anonymous investor. I just sold the rights to the claim for a symbolic amount, of course. But on paper, everything is clean. What happens next? Perry asked. Next, Riverview Investments will win the lawsuit and get my house, and then maybe sell it back to 'em or rent it out or find some other solution. In any case, the house will return to my control directly or indirectly. Hilda and Perry sat stunned. I could see understanding slowly dawning in their eyes. You planned all this, Hilda whispered. You knew this would happen, and you prepared for it. If foresaw the possibility and took precautions, I corrected her. The fact that you ended up on the street is not my doing. It is the result of your own actions. I simply protected my interests. And you won't help us, she said, not as a question, but as a statement. No, I shook my head. I won't. You're adults, Hilda. You made your choice when you kicked me out of my house. Now live with the consequences. What are we going to do? Her voice sounded desperate. Where should we go? That's not my problem. I finished my coffee and took out my wallet. I put a bill on the table to cover our order with a generous tip. I have my own life, and I intend to live it as I see fit, without you. I stood up, feeling strangely light. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I had been carrying for so long that I had stopped noticing it. Dad, please. Hilda grabbed my hand. Don't leave us like this. We're your family. No, Hilda. I gently pulled my hand away. Family is those who care for each other, those who put the well-being of their loved ones above their own interests. You and Perry proved that you're not my family when you kicked me out of the house. I'm sorry, she cried, unashamed of her tears. I wasn't myself. It was a terrible mistake, perhaps, I nodded. But it was your mistake, and you'll have to live with the consequences. I turned to leave, but stopped and looked at them one last time. You know what's ironic? If you had just let me live in my house like I wanted to, none of this would have happened. The house wouldn't have been seized because there wouldn't have been any shady meetings there. I could have even helped you financially when the problem started. But you chose greed over family, and now you're paying for it. Hilda sobbed, burying her face in Perry's shoulder. He hugged her, but his gaze was empty, lost. I saw before Menot a proud, confident couple, but two broken people who had lost everything: money, status, reputation, and most importantly, they lost me, the last person who could have helped them. I left the cafe without looking back. The bright spring sun was shining outside. I took a deep breath of fresh air and headed for my car. A new life lay ahead without the shadow of Hilda and Perry, without their manipulations and attempts to control me, a life that I would build according to my own rules. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Hilda and Perry sat in their room in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Orland Park, surrounded by the chaos of hastily packed belongings. The noisy air conditioner hummed loudly, barely coping with the June heat. The walls were thin. The sound of a television playing could be heard from the next room, and the noise of passing cars from the street. What are we going to do? Hilda sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. Her usually impeccable hair was a mess, her designer clothes rumpled. We only have enough money left for 3 days in this awful place. Perry paced nervously around the cramped room, stopping occasionally to look out the window at the nearly empty parking lot. I called Bradley and Johnson, he said, referring to his fellow lawyers. They're not answering their phones. Even Bradley's secretary said he was in a meeting, though I know for a fact that he usually plays golf on Tuesdays at this time. They've all turned their backs on us, Hilda said bitterly. All these so-called friends. As soon as they smelled trouble, they disappeared. Perry sank into a worn armchair by the window and loosened the tie he had put on that morning out of habit, even though he had nowhere to go. Richardson called me. He said, "My lawyer. The prosecutor's office is offering a deal." "What kind of deal?" Hilda looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. "If I testify against the management of Global Invest and provide all the documents, they may not include me in the indictment. I may get away with a fine and a suspended sentence. What about our assets? Our house? That's a separate issue." Perry shook his head. "Even if I accept the deal, our property will remain under seizure until the investigation is complete. It could be months before we get anything back. And not everything." Hilda stood up and walked to the window. Their floor overlooked a gas station and a fast food joint, a dreary landscape so unlike the green lawns of their old neighborhood. "We need to find temporary housing," she said, "something more decent than this place. And I need to look for a job. How are we going to rent another place?" Perry spread his hands. "We literally have a few hundred in cash. All our cards are blocked. Maybe one of our relatives can help," Hilda suggested. "You have a sister in Portland, Lisa." Perry smiled bitterly. "We haven't spoken in 3 years. After you said her plumber husband wasn't good enough for our circle." "I didn't say that," Hilda protested, although it was clear from her eyes that she remembered the conversation very well. "You did," Perry sighed. "And that's not all. You also refused to go to their silver wedding anniversary because you had a spa appointment." Hilda turned away, unwilling to admit her husband was right. "Okay, what about your cousin Neil? He's always been good to us. I called him yesterday." Perry shook his head. "He sympathizes with our situation, but now is not the right time for visits. They're renovating, you see." "Renovating," Hilda snorted. "They have a 5-bedroom mansion. Can't they spare one for relatives in need? Apparently not." Perry rubbed his eyes wearily, especially for relatives who last Christmas demonstratively gave their children gift cards instead of those cheap trinkets that are usually exchanged. Hilda blushed, remembering that episode too. "I just wanted them to have the opportunity to choose what they really wanted." "Lizzie collects horse figurines," Perry reminded her, "and you said it was a childish whim and time to outgrow such hobbies. She was 14. So what? It's her hobby. She does equestrian sports. She loves horses. And you made her feel stupid about it." Hilda was silent, staring out the window. Perry was right, and she knew it. They were both arrogant toward their relatives, considering them provincial and not successful enough. Now that they needed help, those bridges had been burned. "Maybe we should try calling my Aunt Martha," Hilda suggested without much hope. "We haven't seen each other in 5 years, but I sent her a card last Christmas." "A card?" Perry raised his eyebrow skeptically. "After you didn't come to her husband's funeral because we had a trip to a ski resort planned." It was a paid trip, non-refundable. Hilda defended herself, but her voice sounded unconvincing even to herself. Hilda, Perry looked at his wife with a tired gaze. Let's be honest, at least now, we were terrible relatives. We only communicated with our family when we needed something or when we wanted to brag about our successes. We missed important family events, forgot birthdays, made condescending comments about their jobs, homes, and cars, and now we're surprised that no one is rushing to our aid. Hilda sank down on the bed, feeling tears welling up in her throat. What should we do? I don't know, Perry replied honestly. Maybe try talking to your father again. Explain how serious the situation is. He won't help, Hilda shook her head. You saw his face in the cafe. He planned everything. He created this company to get his house back. He foresaw what would happen and prepared for it, and he abandoned us to our fate. Can you blame him? Perry asked quietly. After you kicked him out of his own house. Hilda didn't answer. She remembered that day. Her rage, the horrible words she shouted at her father, his shocked face. Shame burned inside her. I was a terrible daughter, she finally admitted. All my life I've only thought about myself, about my own desires. Mom would be disappointed in me. Hey! Perry sat down next to her and put his arm around her shoulders. Don't be so hard on yourself. We've both made mistakes, but it's not too late to start over. How? Hilda wiped away her tears. We're homeless, broke, unemployed, and everyone has turned their backs on us, even my own father. Let's start small, Perry suggested. I'll call Richardson and tell him I agree to a deal with the prosecution. That's the first step toward restoring some kind of normality. Then we'll look for a cheap apartment, maybe even in another city where no one knows us. What will I do? Hilda asked. I don't have any skills except selling houses to rich clients. You'll learn, Perry shrugged. We'll both learn. It won't be easy, but we'll manage. Hilda looked at her husband gratefully. Despite all their problems, despite his questionable business decisions that addled to their downfall, he was still there for her. He didn't abandon her or blame her for all their troubles, even though he could have. After all, it was her persistent desire to live as well as everyone else that had pushed him into increasingly risky deals. I need to call a couple more people, she said, taking out her phone. Maybe one of my former colleagues can help me find a job. It doesn't have to be in real estate. I'll take any position. Perry nodded and returned to the window, watching the cars go by. Their life was falling apart, but perhaps something new could be built from the ruins. Something more modest, but more real. At the same time, a few miles from the cheap motel, Obadiah Pennywell stood on the porch of his house in River Glen. It had been 3 weeks since Hilda kicked him out and a week since federal agents seized Perry's property, including this house. Thanks to a legal scheme devised by Coleman, Riverview Investments was able to quickly prove its priority claim to the property, and yesterday, the house was officially returned to the company's control, and today the company represented by its anonymous investor returned the keys to the rightful owner, me. I opened the door and went inside, feeling a mixture of relief and bitterness. The house that was supposed to be my new beginning now bore the mark of my daughter's betrayal. But I wasn't going to let that fact poison my life. The house was mine, and I intended to make it a cozy place for a peaceful old age. Inside there was chaos. Traces of Hilda and Perry's hasty departure, as well as a search conducted by federal agents. Papers were scattered, drawers were pulled out, furniture was moved. In the kitchen, dirty dishes stood in the sink and leftovers lay on the table. In the living room, sofa cushions lay on the floor and empty wine glasses sat on the coffee table. I sighed and began cleaning up. I collected the trash, loaded the dishwasher, and put the furniture back in its place. In the study where Hilda and I had once had an argument, I found scattered documents, Perry's legal papers, some financial reports. I put all of this in a box, which I would later give to Coleman. Perhaps there was something useful for the investigation. The master bedroom, where Hilda and Perry had obviously lived, was in particular disarray. Clothes were scattered about. Hilda's cosmetics were strewn across the dressing table, and the bed was unmade. I methodically collected everything into large plastic bags. I would decide later what to do with it. Maybe send it to them via Coleman or just throw it away. Right now, it was important to cleanse the house of their presence. By evening, the main cleaning was finished. I took out the last bag of trash, returned to the house, and locked the door. Standing in the clean but empty living room, I felt a strange calm. The house was mine again, and mine alone. I went out onto the terrace with a glass of whiskey. My first of this long day. The sun was setting, painting the pond in shades of golden pink. On the opposite shore, lights were coming on in the houses. My neighbors, successful, prosperous people, were returning from work, gathering for dinner with their families, going about their business. I wonder if they knew about the drama that had unfolded in my house. Did they see the federal agents taking Hilda and Perry away? What were they thinking? And did it matter? I took a sip of whiskey, enjoying its warmth and complex aroma. The last few weeks had made me think about a lot of things. About my life, my decisions, my relationship with my daughter. Where had I gone wrong in raising her? When did my sweet little girl turn into a greedy, selfish woman willing to kick her own father out of the house for money? Maybe Beatrix and I spoiled her too much. Or on the contrary, was I too strict and she grew up feeling that she had to prove her worth through material success? Or was it something else? A society that values the external trappings of success over human relationships. Her husband, who showed, by example, that money can be placed above morality. I didn't know the answers to these questions, and perhaps there simply weren't any. People make their choices, and Hilda had made hers. Now she had to live with the consequences, and I had to move on without Hilda, without the burden of responsibility for her well-being that I had carried all these years, free from manipulation, from guilt, from the need to live up to someone else's expectations. I finished my whiskey and went back into the house. Tomorrow I would have to order new bedding. I didn't want to sleep on what Hilda and Perry had used, maybe a new mattress too, and change the locks, although they would hardly dare to come back. And order groceries, and the to-do list was growing, but I didn't mind. I like planning, organizing, making my home cozy. A home I bought for myself with my own money earned through decades of honest work. The phone rang. "Roland Obie, how are you? Everything okay?" "Yes," I replied. And for the first time in a long time, it was the absolute truth. Everything's fine. The house is mine again. It's a bit messy, but I've almost cleaned everything up. Great. Marion and I were thinking of stopping by tomorrow. Want us to help you get settled in? Marion will bake her famous apple pie. Is mild. That's what true friendship is. Not a superficial relationship based on status and benefit, but a sincere desire to be there, to help, to share both joys and hardships. "With pleasure," I said. "Come over for dinner. It's a date." "And Obie." Roland paused. "I'm glad everything turned out this way. You deserve a peaceful life in your own home." "Thank you, my friend." I was touched by his words. "See you tomorrow." I hung up and walked around the house, turning off the lights in the rooms I wasn't going touse anytime soon. The house was big for one person, but that didn't bother me. I liked the space. I liked the silence. I liked being able to do everything the way I wanted without worrying about other people's opinions. In my study, I stopped at the window and looked out at the garden at night. I wonder what Beatrix would say if she saw how things had turned out. She was always gentler than me, always ready to forgive Hilda for her whims and selfishness. But even she, I think, would not have been able to forgive such betrayal. Or would she? She loved our daughter unconditionally with all her heart. Perhaps she would have found the strength to reach out even after everything that had happened. I wasn't. Sure, I had that strength. The wound was too fresh, the pain of betrayal too sharp. Maybe with time, But not now. Right now, I just wanted to live my life, enjoy the peace and independence I deserved after long years of hard work, spend time with real friends, pursue hobbies I had always put off until later, maybe even travel. I had always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, but could never find the time. Now the time was mine alone, and I intended to use it wisely. I went up to the bedroom I had chosen for myself. Not the master bedroom where Hilda and Perry lived, but the smaller one with a view of the pond. I made a temporary bed from a spare set of linens I found in the closet. Tomorrow, I'll get settled in more thoroughly. But today, I would just relax in my own home, in my own bed. As I fell asleep, I thought about the amazing turn my life had taken. Just a month ago, I had imagined my future very differently, with regular visits from Hilda, with her care, which was really just a disguised form of control, with the constant feeling that I had to live up to her expectations, save her inheritance, and obey her ideas about how an elderly person should live. Now, all that was in the past. Ahead of me was a new chapter, uncertain, a little scary, but full of possibilities. My life, my rules, my decisions. And as I fell asleep in my house, I felt a deep satisfaction that I had managed to protect what was rightfully mine. Not just the house, my independence, my dignity, my ability to determine my own destiny. It was a victory, bitter but necessary. 3 months have passed since the day I got my house back. The summer heat was gradually giving way to the coolness of autumn. The leaves on the trees around the pond were beginning to change color, turning golden and red. I loved this time of year. Quiet, peaceful, conducive to reflection. Over these months, I had completely furnished the house to my liking. I replaced the furniture in the bedroom and living room and installed a large table in my study for my hobby, wood carving. I planted several rose bushes in the garden. Beatrice had always loved roses and built a small gazebo by the pond where it was pleasant to spend evenings with a book and a glass of whiskey. Life was gradually getting back to normal. I found a new routine and new joys. In the mornings, I walked around the pond greeting my neighbors, many of whom became my friends. During the day, I took care of the house and garden, or met with Roland and other friends. I devoted my evenings to reading and wood carving, an old hobby I had returned to with renewed enthusiasm. I hadn't heard anything specific about Hilda and Perry, although rumors reached me from time to time. Roland, who by virtue of his work was aware of many things going on in Orland Park, occasionally mentioned their names in conversation. That's how I learned that Perry had made a deal with the prosecutor and avoided prison, but lost his law license, that their house had been sold to pay off debts and compensate victims of global investors' fraud, that they had moved somewhere on the outskirts of town. I didn't seek out my daughter, but I didn't avoid thinking about her either. Sometimes, especially on quiet evenings, I remembered Hilda as a little girl, her laughter, her delight in simple things, her unconditional love for me and Beatrice. When and how did everything change? At what point did money and status become more important to her than family ties? However, these thoughts did not cause the same bitterness as before. Time really does heal, and my wound was gradually closing. I learned to think of Hilda without anger, though without the warmth I once felt for my daughter. One day in September, as I was working in the garden, trimming the rose bushes before the cold weather set in, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any visitors. Roland and Marion were away visiting their daughter at college, and I had no plans to see any other close friends today. Taking off my gardening gloves and brushing the dirt off my knees, I headed for the door. Opening it, I froze in surprise. Hilda was standing on the doorstep. She had changed since we last saw each other. She had lost weight, and her features had become more angular. The former confidence in her gaze had disappeared, replaced by a somewhat haunted expression. Her clothes, A simple blouse and jeans looked modest, quite unlike her usual designer outfits. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated only for a moment. No matter how complicated our relationship was, she was still my daughter. "Come in." I stepped aside, letting her into the house. Hilda entered, looking around uncertainly. She noticed the changes in the interior, the new furniture, my woodwork on the shelves. "It's become cozier," she remarked. "I've decorated the house to my taste," I replied neutrally. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes, thank you." We went into the kitchen. Hilda sat down at the table while I made tea. An awkward pause ensued. "How are you?" she finally asked. "You look well." "I'm fine," I replied, placing a cup in front of her. "And you?" She looked down at her hands. "I've been better," she admitted quietly. "The last few months have been difficult." "Yes, I heard," I said, sitting down opposite her. "Roland told me that Perry made a deal with the prosecution." "Yes," Hilda nodded. "He avoided prison, but he's been banned from practicing law for life. Now he works as a consultant for a construction company for peanuts, of course, compared to his previous income. And you?" "I got a job as a secretary at an insurance company." She smiled weakly. "I never thought I'd be starting my career from scratch at 45. Life is unpredictable," I said without any sympathy or malice in my words. "Just a statement of fact." Hilda took a sip of tea. "We're renting an apartment on Oak Street. It's small, only one bedroom, but it's all we can afford right now." I knew the area, old apartment buildings, on the outskirts of town, far from the prestigious neighborhoods where Hilda and Perry used to live. It wasn't a slum, but it was definitely not what they were used to. "Why did you come, Hilda?" I asked bluntly. "What do you want?" She looked a little embarrassed, but quickly pulled herself together. "I wanted to apologize, Dad, for everything that happened, for how I behaved, for the awful things I said, for kicking you out of your own home." I looked at her closely, trying to discern the true motives behind her visit. Was this sincere remorse or another manipulation? "These months have taught me a lot," Hilda continued. "I realized that I was a terrible daughter, selfish, demanding, ungrateful. You were always there for me, always supporting me, and I only thought about money, status, what others would think." Her words sounded sincere, but something in her gaze, in her posture, alarmed me. Her speech was too measured, her words too carefully chosen. "And now you want to make amends," I said. It was not a question, but a statement. "Yes," she looked up at me. "I want to start over, to be a family, to visit you, help with the house, spend holidays together. Like before everything went wrong, I was silent, thinking about her words. There was a grain of truth in them. She really could be remorseful for her actions, but I felt that there was something else behind it. "What about Perry?" I asked. "Does he want to start over too?" "Of course," Hilda replied quickly. "He's terribly sorry for his role in all this. He asked me to convey his apologies and his hope that someday you will be able to forgive him. Perry, who didn't find the time to come in person, who allowed Hilda to kick me out of the house and didn't stop her, who used my house for his shady business meetings knowing it could lead to his arrest." "What else, Hilda?" I asked bluntly. "Why did you really come here?" She looked puzzled. "I told you." "Yes. You said you wanted to make amends. And maybe that's true, but I feel like there's something else, something you're not talking about." Hilda lowered her eyes for a moment, then took a deep breath. "You've always seen right through me." She smiled weakly. "Yes, there is something else. Perry and we're having financial difficulties. Our debts are huge. Our income is minimal. We're barely making ends meet. And I thought, maybe you could help. Not necessarily with money, although that would be ideal. Maybe let us live here for a while. The house is big. There's enough room for everyone. We would help with the utility bills, with cleaning. There it was. The real reason for her visit, her repentance, her desire to start over. Not love for me, not awareness of her mistakes, but the same old thirst for material goods. No, Hilda. I shook my head. It's impossible. But why? Her voice took on a pleading tone. We wouldn't bother you, honestly, and it's only temporary until we get back on our feet. I don't want to live under the same roof as you, I said bluntly. After everything that's happened, it would be unnatural. But we're family, she almost exclaimed. Shouldn't families support each other in difficult times? Family? I raised an eyebrow. You only remembered family ties when you were in trouble, when you needed something from me. Where was that sense of family when you kicked me out of the house? When you yelled, "Dad, get out now"? Hilda lowered her head. I already said I'm sorry. What else can I do to prove my sincerity? It's not about proof, Hilda. I sighed. It's that I don't believe you anymore. I don't believe in your sincerity, in your ability to think about anyone but yourself. And I don't want to put myself at risk of your manipulation again. You won't forgive me. Her voice trembled. I already have, I replied. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let you back into my life. It doesn't mean I have to help you financially or let you live in my house. Then what's the point of all this? There was a note of irritation in her voice. Why talk about forgiveness if you're going to turn your back on us in our time of need anyway? See? I smiled sadly. You're showing your true colors again. For you, forgiveness is only valuable if it comes with material benefits. If I'm not willing to give you money or let you live in my house, then I'm turning my back on you in your time of need. Hilda was silent, clearly struggling with herself. Finally, she looked up again. Okay, I understand that living together is a bad idea, but maybe you could lend us a little money, just a little, just to get us started. We'll pay you back every penny, I promise. No, Hilda, I was firm. I won't give you any money. Why? She didn't hide her disappointment. You have enough. You bought this house, started some kind of company to get it back. You obviously have savings. I did. I nodded. But I have other plans for that money. What plans? She frowned. What could be more important than helping my own daughter? I stood up and walked to the window, looking at my garden, the pond, the peaceful picture of an autumn day. He changed the will, Hilda, I said calmly. You are no longer my heir. She looked as if I had hit her. What? But how can that be? I'm your only daughter. The daughter who kicked me out of my own house, I reminded her. The daughter who for years was only interested in my money, not my well-being. The daughter who only came with apologies when she needed something from me. That's not fair. Her voice was filled with indignation. Who are you going to leave your money to? Some strangers? No. It turned to her. I'll leave part of it to Roland and Marion, the people who were really there for me when I needed help. Part of it will go to charity, but most of it I plan to spend myself. Spend? She looked stunned. On what? On life, Hilda? I smiled. On the trips I've always put off. On the hobbies I wanted to pursue but never found the time for. On meeting friends, on new experiences, on everything that makes life worth living. But that's wasteful. She was horrified. At your age, at my age, I interrupted her. I finally realized that life is too short to put off joy until later, to skimp on myself for the sake of an inheritance that will go to ungrateful descendants. Hilda sat there, shaken by my words. I saw the emotions change in her eyes, disbelief, anger, despair, and finally resignation. You're not going to change your mind? She asked quietly. No. I was calm and confident. The decision has been made. She stood up, adjusting her purse on her shoulder. Then I guess I'll go. Thanks for the tea. I walked her to the door. She stopped at the threshold and turned to me. I'm really sorry, Dad. Not about the money, about the fact that we've become strangers. about the fact that I destroyed our family with my greed. Tears glistened in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of sincerity in them. Perhaps somewhere deep inside this calculating woman, there was still that little girl I once loved with all my heart. "I know, Hilda," I said more gently, "and I hope you'll learn from all this, that you'll understand that there are things in life more important than money and status." "I already have," she smiled weakly. "It's too late, but I understand." We said goodbye without hugging, without promising to meet again. We just nodded to each other like old acquaintances who had met by chance and were now going their separate ways. I watched her walk to her car, not the luxurious one she used to have, but a modest used sedan. Her shoulders were slumped. Her gait had lost its former confidence. Life had been cruel to her, but perhaps it was a necessary lesson. When her car disappeared around the bend, I returned to the house. I washed the cups and put them away. I looked at my watch. Roland was due to arrive soon. We had planned a game of chess and a barbecue on the terrace. Strangely, after Hilda left, I felt neither sadness nor regret. Only a quiet satisfaction that I had made the right decision. I would no longer allow anyone, not even my own daughter, on to manipulate me, make me feel guilty, or take away my freedom and independence. This was my life, and I intended to live it by my own rules. 2 weeks after Hilda's visit, I went on my first trip to the Grand Canyon, a place I had always wanted to see. Standing on the edge of this majestic abyss, looking at millions of years of history captured in layers of rock, I felt both small and significant. Small in the face of eternity and the immensity of nature. Significant because I was here seeing it, experiencing the moment. The Grand Canyon was followed by other trips to Yellowstone National Park, Alaska, New Orleans. With its music and unique atmosphere, I was discovering a world I had always read about, but never seen with my own eyes. Between trips, I returned to my home in River Glen, a quiet haven where I could relax, reflect on what I had seen, and plan new adventures. Roland and Marion often came to visit, sometimes with other friends. We had dinner on the terrace, played cards and chess, and discussed books and movies. I enjoyed these simple pleasures, which had previously seemed so insignificant compared to serious matters. I heard about Hilda and Perry occasionally through mutual acquaintances. They still lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, worked in low-paying jobs, and tried to get out of debt. Their life was not easy, but they were coping. Hilda no longer tried to contact me, apparently accepting my decision as final. Sometimes on quiet evenings I thought of her with a slight sadness. Not the greedy, calculating woman who kicked me out of the house, but the little girl with pigtails whom I once carried on my shoulders and taught to ride a bike. The daughter I lost long before our final breakup, lost in the pursuit of material success and social status. But this sadness was light. Not overshadowing my current life, I learned to accept the past for what it was, not allowing it to poison the present or the future. And the future looked bright and promising. I had plans for new travels, new wood-carving projects, new books to read. I thought about signing up for photography classes. I always wanted to. Learn how to take good pictures, or maybe learn to play the guitar. Music has always appealed to me, but I never found the time to take it seriously. Now I had plenty of time and the freedom to use it as I wished. No obligations, no expectations from others, no burden of guilt or need to conform to other people's ideas of how someone my age should live. Just my life, my decisions, my path. And as I sat on the terrace of my house in River Glen watching the sunset over the pond, I felt a deep satisfaction with how everything had turned out. Not perfect, not without pain and loss, but honest and right. I defended what was rightfully mine. Not only my home, but also my right to happiness, to freedom, to a dignified life. It was a victory, small in the grand scheme of things, but huge for me. A victory not over Hilda, but over the fear of loneliness, over the habit of sacrificing myself for others, over the stereotypes that an elderly person should live out their life quietly, saving on everything for the sake of their heirs. I chose a different path, and I had no regrets.